From the burning mazes of the Sonoran Desert to the slot machine-clad boardwalks of New Jersey, it's the Imaginarium with Scott and Todd. I'm Scott Colbert.
And I'm the horror nerd, Todd Staruch.
And this week, we're going to be talking about music.
Yes.
Put another nickel in the Nickelodeon. All I want is loving you and music, music, music. I'd do anything for you, anything you'd want me to. All I want is kissing you and music, music, music.
Before we get into that, you were at the Macabre Faire Film Festival this past weekend.
Yes, I was. And as always, it was fantastic. For those of you listening who are not familiar with it, the Macabre Faire Film Festival is a festival of independent film that takes place out on Long Island every January. And we screen hundreds of indie films. We have a fantastic red carpet event. We have meet and greets with a lot of filmmakers. It's truly an amazing event. Elsie and Adam Ginsberg of Twitch Productions put on a really great event. A big shout out to them.
And you took a couple of pictures.
Yeah, just a few. There's a rumor out there that I like to take pictures.
I think you said 746.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did take that many pictures. Thank God for digital photography.
Give or take a few.
Yeah, now that's not how many I will post because, not everyone came out great. So I'll have it down to 500 in no time.
And now the last time that we recorded, one of the things that we talked about afterwards was what we're going to do for the next show. And we had decided to talk about music. And then, unfortunately, we lost several musical legends. David Bowie, Glenn Frey.
Lemmy.
Yeah. So I think now it's actually even more appropriate to talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you what, when it comes to music, 2016 sucks so far.
Yeah, 2016 is not starting off the way that I would like it to. And I'm not actually looking forward to the rest of the year because I am sure every other aging rock star is looking at the calendar wondering when their time is going to be coming.
Yeah, it's, I realize that all of my personal musical heroes are all getting old. I mean, Paul McCartney, Eric Clapton, Chuck Berry, I mean, you name it. None of them are very young anymore, so you're right. It's only a matter of time. The David Bowie news hit me rather hard. I was a big fan. He was a big influence on me. And, he's one of those rare artists that sort of transcended everything,
I really didn't think about it until they started kind of dying off. And when you get to be our age, our icons from our youth start to die off. That's just the natural way of things. But David Bowie was 69 when he passed away.
Right.
And I'm thinking, that's only 5 years younger than my mother. And I start putting these things in perspective, mate, because you don't really, realize, how old some of them actually are. Rock stars have always had this kind of mythic persona about them. And, when they start to kick off and you see their ages, you just kind of go, wow.
Well, that coupled with the fact that somehow Keith Richards is still alive. I know you'll probably have a lot to say as well, but the one thing that really drove me crazy is, so on social media, first of all, I thought like that the outpouring of love and admiration for these guys was really amazing on social media. You and I both have a lot of friends who are very creative people. We know a lot of artists and musicians, and most of them were touched by David Bowie or Glenn Frey. But then you have the cool kids that always have to come out and start to bitch and say, oh, more jumping on the bandwagon of a dead celebrity, or where was everybody? Why wasn't anybody talking about David Bowie a month ago? And I wondered, like, can you be any more asinine? Just because I'm a fan of an artist doesn't mean I have to blather on about them every single day. I just don't understand the mentality of some people on social media.
I think part of that's just the social media personality of being able to say anything without any form of repercussions for the most part. Now, you had mentioned this on Facebook page, which made a comeback this week.
Yes, it did. My sort of ranting and raving group, I brought it back, like, as just a way for me to just spout off on whatever happens to be pissing me off at any given moment, which could be any number of things.
And this is one of the things that you talked about today. And, people had a lot of different reactions. And, of course, me being me, I looked at it a little bit differently. And, I mean, I look at it, yes, there are people who say these things just to be assholes. And that happened before social media, and that's going to happen after social media. People are just assholes, period. But for some, I think it's a way for them to be able to come to grips with, the realities of death or the realities of grieving. Because one of the things that we talked about, or that was mentioned in that blog post that you put up there, was, well, why wasn't it Justin Bieber or the Kardashians or blah, blah, blah instead of David Bowie?
Right.
It's much easier to cope with death if it's somebody that you don't like. But when it's somebody that, particularly like David Bowie, who really was so instrumental in changing music and the way that we perceive it, it's a huge loss. And it's difficult dealing with that. And I think sometimes, that's just a coping mechanism for people. I'm not saying that it's a healthy coping mechanism or if it's right, but, that's what it seems like to me.
And as I had mentioned on the Facebook page, that's a fair point. I had never really thought about it that way. What you're alluding to is when I said that I thought it was wrong for people to sort of wish that it had been Kanye West or Justin Bieber who had died instead of David Bowie or Lemmy. And I just felt that was wrong. I don't care for Kanye West. I think he's a complete douche, but, I don't wish death on the man. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a husband and a father. I don't need to like him. He doesn't even know that I exist on the planet.
Yeah.
So what difference does it make whether I like Kanye West or not? None, But I had never thought about it that way, that's, some people are just trying to sort of cope or deal with it somehow.
Well, I don't know whether it's just because I've been, thinking about death recently. Well, I know it sounds morbid, but, thinking about, my mother's, health, which isn't all that good, and having to face, that reality, and then looking at some of my own health issues, so you start to think about, what happens. And then when you see somebody who you think is untouchable, like David Bowie or Glenn Frey, you just kind of realize, wow, death happens to anybody. Now, one of the things that I'm going to mention, because I know a lot of listeners are going to remember this, so I'm just going to get this out of the way so I don't particularly sound like a hypocrite. The very first podcast that I ever was on was the Shut Up Kids podcast about 2 years ago. And during the recording of that podcast, the announcement that Harold Ramis had passed away. So we talked about it during the podcast, and my initial reaction was, and why isn't Michael Bay fucking dead instead? That was my reaction to that. Now, my saying that was more of a humorous thing, but sometimes it's easy to just fall into that trap of, only the good die young, and why are these assholes still alive?
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. And once you made the comment, I really started thinking about it, and it comes back, the age-old question of why do bad things happen to good people, Now,
Yeah.
having said that, I only know David Bowie's public persona. For all I know, he was drowning puppies in his spare time, I didn't know him personally. And while I think there is some level of truth when people say, oh, why are you wailing over David Bowie's death? You didn't know him. And you're right. I didn't know him personally, but I think that musicians and other artists give a piece of themselves through their art. So in a way, you do have a connection with them. Music is a huge part of my life. Hearing the right song at the right time can make me feel better.
I think music, at least for me, it touches something, it does something for me that not even the written word can do, or a movie can do. There's just something innate about music that really, reaches me to the core. A good example of that, I think, is first time that I heard Peter Gabriel's album, Security. It was the Rhythm of the Heat was the song that I'm thinking about. And if anybody isn't familiar with it, go over to YouTube and listen to it, because it's on there somewhere. But he goes through the song. Towards the very end, he lets out this long note, and it lasts for at least 25 or 30 seconds, and then goes into frantic African drum sounds. And I found it almost disturbing on a visceral level. And then I found out the story behind that song, and which I'm not going to spoil. I think people should go and Google that story, because it's really kind of interesting. But it has to do with Carl Jung. You just don't really get that kind of vibe or feel from a book or a movie. I don't think so.
I agree, and I'm a big fan of classical music and opera as well. And when I hear a particularly moving piece of music or an aria from a favorite opera, it really does make me feel better physically and mentally, So there's a reason why they have, music therapy in hospitals, because it's a known fact, So when people are like, oh, you're jumping on the David Bowie bandwagon, like, shut up. Just crawl back onto whatever rock you crawled out of, to make that comment, and move on. If you're not a fan, that's fine. There's plenty of artists, where I'm like, oh, wow, he passed away. Oh, okay. Wasn't really a fan, but, that's too bad. It doesn't mean I'm falling all over myself, but I can still see it as a downer,
And one of the other things that I've noticed, particularly with David Bowie, I actually haven't really heard anything about yet, was they brought up his past, the statutory rape of the groupie, but that they feel like they have to tarnish them somehow. And okay, I'm not gonna stand here and say, well, there's no big deal about fucking a 14-year-old groupie. I mean, you man in his 20s, obviously it's wrong. And I say that, and I'm about to say something probably that's going to get me a lot of mail. When that happened, times were different. There were groupies everywhere, and young, old, it didn't matter. There were all these groupies. Almost Famous is a fantastic fucking movie. the director's version, not the cut version, and that shows exactly the kind of frantic atmosphere that was going on in the 70s with musicians. And, and that's not to excuse him by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't looked at the way it's looked at today.
I understand where you're coming from. I really do. I mean, look at Roman Polanski. There's two camps with Roman Polanski. There's the camp that wants to burn him at the stake, and I totally understand that. And then there's another camp that views it differently. I happen to be in the former camp because I think with him it was a little more premeditated and evil, but that's a whole nother discussion for another time. I do understand where you're coming from. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get myself into the same trouble you just got yourself into.
Yeah. Well,
you're on your own, buddy.
It annoys me because, nobody said anything about his past until after he died. And I know that kind of sounds like, well, nobody said anything about David Bowie a month before he died and all that kind of stuff. But there just seems to be almost a jealousy.
I think you're exactly right. Some people anyway lead sad and miserable lives, and so the only thing they can think to do is disparage somebody else. And look, just because I like David Bowie or Lemmy, it doesn't mean they're certainly above reproach. Lemmy did a ton of drugs, destroyed a ton of property. I'm not trying to say that Lemmy was some sort of a saint, and he would never have claimed to have been a saint. But his impact on the world of rock and heavy metal can never be diminished, regardless of what he might have done.
Found interesting. People were actually equating David Bowie's situation with Bill Cosby. And that actually infuriated me because those are two totally separate. You can't compare them. They're just not even in the same fucking ballpark.
I agree. Again, I understand where people are coming from. Violence against women or sexual assault against women is a very passionate subject. So, if someone feels strongly about it, that's their prerogative. But I do agree, where the difference is. I mean, you look up, and I had sort of forgotten about the rape charges against David Bowie. So when I went back and did a bunch of research, and you hit the nail right out of the head on the head. The whole, there was a whole concept of, they were called baby groupies in the glam and new wave rock scene in the 70s. So I wonder how many rockers out there, had sex with someone who might have been underage. And again, to your point, not to say, oh, well, yeah, big deal, not to excuse it. But what Bill Cosby is alleged to have done is a whole nother predatory ball game, as far as I'm concerned. Oh well, I don't want to dwell on that. The last thing I will personally say about it is I just think it's silly to say, oh well, how come nobody was talking about David Bowie? That go ahead.
I was just going to say, and my thought was, we all have skeletons in our closet, and what are people going to say about us when we die?
Exactly. Exactly. Think about anything in the world. Like, no one is talking about it until something happens there. Some small town in Alabama. Well, no one's talking about it until something happens there. Rush is my absolute favorite band in the world. but I don't write about them every day, and I don't even listen to them every day. Does that mean I'm not a good fan? I'm just tired of that elitist bullshit that people post, you know? Oh, no one was talking about Glenn Fry or the Eagles. Are you kidding me? Turn on any classic radio station right now, and there's probably a better than 50% chance you will hear an Eagles song. You know, so don't tell me nobody's thinking about the Eagles.
Well, let's go to something a little bit more cheerier.
Okay.
The last couple of shows, last 3 shows anyway, we've been so serious.
Yeah, we're just bitching and moaning and yelling about shit.
Well, it's funny. When I first started the Imaginarium, people were making the comments that it was like an NPR, only more interesting. But now it's really is sounding like public radio. Not that that's a bad thing. What was the first album you ever got?
The first album?
Yeah.
Holy shit. Wow. The first album I ever got. I honestly do not remember. Huh. I really don't, Scott. I really don't.
Wow.
I was probably a kid, you know, and it was probably something silly. Wow. I'm going to have to think about that. What was the first one you ever got? Maybe
I should have
wow.
mentioned that in a message to you before the show.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It might have been maybe the first I don't know. It might have been Thriller by Michael Jackson. Because when I was a kid, like when I was in elementary school, I don't think I bought a lot of albums. 45s were a big deal then.
Yeah.
So I still have a lot of them. I have a ton of singles on 45. Because my parents were like, oh, you want that extra kind of stuff? You have to buy it. 45s were like 50 cents. So it was a little easier.
Yeah, 45s. That was the big thing. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the first 45 that I remember getting was Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog.
Oh, okay. Joy to the World.
Yeah. Jeremiah was a bullfrog.
That's a good song.
I love that song so much. I drove my family fucking nuts with it. It came out and it was popular on one of those long cross-country station wagon family vacations. Although we had a Buick, not a station wagon. And all I would do is just sing that song over and over and over. And they just, it was almost like Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man with People's Court. I latched onto that song and I just loved it. That and Bad Bad Leroy Brown was my other favorite.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had a ton of stuff on 45. I believe it or not, I must have worn out my Puff the Magic Dragon 45.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, that song always makes me cry like a little girl. It's funny, I was thinking about the different eras of music, and a lot of what I tend to go back to is stuff from the 70s, much like my movie taste go back to the 70s. My musical taste goes back to the 70s as well. It was a time where songs were actually were stories, really. And you had some of the probably the greatest songwriters of our time working through the 70s.
Oh yeah.
And and that's not to take anything away from the 60s or the 80s or anything past 1995, I know nothing about because that's when I stopped listening to radio. It took 95 was the year that music took on a sound that I just didn't quite like or understand. I said, I'm going to go under my rock with all my CDs and listen to everything that I've ever listened to. And I know that I'm kind of sound like one of those late night infomercials for CDs, but there really was something to the music back then. The songs that Harry Chapin did, Cat Stevens before he became whatever the fuck his name is now.
Oh, Yusuf Islam.
Yeah, right. Elton John. I mean, you just look back and you think, holy shit.
Yeah, I obviously, I was born in 1968. See, you're way older than I am. So, I was born in 68. So for me, the 70s, I discovered later in life, when I was, the early 70s, I was, 4, 5, 6 years old. I was still watching cartoons and listening to kid stuff, So
Yeah.
I discovered the 70s and, and of course the 60s and such, later in life. But to your point, yeah, a lot of great music coming out of the 70s, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, you name it. I mean, it's a treasure trove. And even though I grew up with the in the 80s, I was in high school in the 80s, with 80s music and hair bands and all that stuff. But now I have a newfound appreciation for it, So when I'm listening to the radio and, Journey comes on or Styx or something, I'm like, I turn up the radio,
I think, I always used to consider myself like a child of the 80s, but I mean, I was born in 65, so it's actually really the 70s that I have more nostalgia for than I do the 80s. Of course, I mean, I have a lot of nostalgia for the 80s too, but it's the 70s that I find myself going back to constantly, whether it's for music, for movies, or for TV shows.
Yeah,
I don't know.
hear
Maybe
you.
it was all the pot everybody smoked.
Maybe, who knows? Everybody's got their thing, I span all kinds of eras. I love the Motown era and doo-wop because of my dad, when I was a kid in the car, my dad had an actual honest to God 8-track player in his car. He had an old Pontiac. So, we listened to 8-tracks, doo-wop and Motown and things like that, So even now, I still have a fondness for that music and for that style because that's what I listened to riding around with my dad,
Yeah, and I find music that I couldn't necessarily tolerate or like as a kid, mainly the stuff from the 40s and 50s that my parents listened to. When I hear it, my mom has XM or Serial, whatever the radio thing is.
Right, the satellite.
Yeah. She's got that in her car, so she listens to big band stuff. She's got a Frank Sinatra station and a couple others, but her musical taste doesn't go past 1959. And so listening to that now, I'm like, wow, that's some really good stuff. There's some really bad stuff too. People remember all the good songs Frank Sinatra sang. They don't remember some of the absolute shitty songs that he had to sing because the record companies forced him to sing those songs.
Oh, absolutely. Pick any band, pick any era, and there's some clunkers. Not every Beatles song is a home run. Led Zeppelin has a bunch of clunkers. There's no doubt about it.
What do you think is your most listened to album?
Moving Pictures by Rush. Not even a question. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, you are a huge Rush fan.
I am. They are my absolute favorite band. I have every album, every bootleg, every international release, every downloaded demo track that they ever tinkered around with. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Well, I can't blame you for that. And I'm actually going to have to think about this because there's a lot that I've played over and over. Wow. What? If I had to give a guess, I would say the album that I've probably listened to the most was Selling England by the Pound by Genesis.
Good album.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
Yep. That was when Peter Gabriel was with the band. It was from 1974. And oddly enough, though, I did not hear that album until I was about 18 or 19. I had only heard of Genesis from when the Shapes album came out. And my roommate at the time said, Tim, he said, well, if you like that, you're just going to love this. And he took out some of the other albums of Genesis, and I'm looking at the albums, the LPs, and I saw that Peter Gabriel was on it, and I didn't know that. Really? He sang for Genesis? And yeah, he founded the band. That's how he talked very low. And if you knew him, that would be a perfect impression. But he turned me on to not only Genesis, but progressive rock in general. And from there, obviously, I went and got the back catalog of Genesis, and then I never really quite looked at that Shapes album again the same way, because I thought there's how do you get from here to here? Yeah. There's some remnants of what they sounded like from 20 years ago, but not quite. But I'm not one of those purists about Genesis. I actually really do like the poppy stuff too. People can sue me for that, but that's just how it is.
You know something? It seems like almost every prog rock group, with the exception of maybe King Crimson, sort of went that route. Yes is my second favorite band in the world. And when 90125 came out, everybody accused them of selling out, because they went from these epic songs, 8, 10, 12, 20-minute songs with sweeping orchestrations and such, to much more radio-friendly songs. And initially I felt that way as well. When 90125 came out, I was like, what in the actual fuck is this? Who the hell is Trevor Rabin? Why did he ruin my band? I look back on it now and say it's a good album, and they did what they had to do to stay relevant.
Yeah.
It's you can keep making records for your hardcore fan base, or you can say, well, we're going to expand our horizons and try something different, and maybe sell some records.
Well, if you don't adapt, you die. You become irrelevant. I mean, that's really how it is, unfortunately. One of my favorite bands, Genesis, and this band Marillion, they go back and forth as my favorite band, depending on, I guess, the mood I'm in that day. But Marillion had by far my favorite singer, who is Fish. And the 4 albums that he did with Marillion were very Genesis-like, and I loved that. And then when he left the band, Steve Hogarth took over vocals. The nature of the band changed. You could still hear tones of what they did prior to Hogarth joining the band. Because Steve Rothery, for me, is probably one of the most brilliant guitarists on the entire planet, period. The man is just amazing with what he can do with the guitar. And so you can always hear him. You can always hear his very distinct sound. But they changed, a lot, and they had to, because, prog rock started dying out a little bit, and they had to adapt or die like everybody else.
As a band, you got to decide what it is you want to be. Are you going to stay 100% true to form and again play to your established fan base? Or are you going to try to expand? Again, like I said, I think King Crimson is probably the only prog rock band that they always have been what they are, and I'm not sure how big a fan you are of theirs, but Robert Fripp is, I also, think he is an amazing technical guitarist, and they've always stayed true to form. I don't know if they've ever sold more than maybe 1 million copies of any particular record. I don't think they care.
Yeah, they're another favorite band of mine. I will say, Marillion, they were actually one of the very first, if not the first, band to do any kind of Kickstarter type thing. They really actually kind of invented it, if you listen to Mark Kelly, the keyboardist. And they were soliciting their fans to pre-order and pre-buy the new album that they were working on, which was, I think it was Anarachnophobia at the time. And it was so successful that they have done it with every album since. And they've made 18 albums total. And I would say probably 12 of them have all been funded through some type of a GoFundMe or Kickstarter program, because they got dropped by their label, and so they decided to carry on and finance themselves. And they don't worry about getting new fans because their base is so fucking loyal. It's almost scary.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You know what? And good for them, because that means they can, do what is in their hearts, and they don't feel that they have to go outside that fan base to prove anything or to please anybody. Good for them.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite concert?
Wow. I would have to say that I have been to so many until I just couldn't afford it anymore. I used to go to at least a dozen big concerts every year. If you put a gun to my head and say pick your favorite, I would have to say Pink Floyd on the Division Bell tour was visually, from a audio and visual level, was the most amazing rock concert I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot. And I'm not, coming very close. And I'm not saying it just because he recently died. David Bowie, the Sound and Vision tour, which I think was 1990, I want to say, was pretty amazing. That was the tour where he said he was going to retire all of his greatest hits, right, so he could move on, to new things. So it was just, and he had this screen, this opaque screen that would come down either in front of him or behind him that would show videos while he was playing. And that's Adrian Belew was the guitarist on that tour.
I think probably my favorite concert was Paul McCartney in, I think it was 1990. It was 89 or 90. I was super stoked. And it's not that I was ever actually like a huge Beatles fan. I'd always liked them. It was just a chance to hear, one of the Beatles and hear the Beatles songs performed live with at least one of the members of it. And for me, I thought it was kind of like a historic thing. And that's really how they were ramping this tour up for him. This particular tour, because it'd been a few years since he'd done any tours. And tickets were $100 a pop, which in 1989,
that was a lot.
That's a lot. And my friend Dale, my roommate Dale at the time, he managed to call in and get the tickets. And I just remember, driving down to Sun Devil Stadium and getting into the nosebleed section where our seats were. And, as soon as I heard the first few notes of Band on the Run, which I think was the opening song, I just got goosebumps. And, between yelling and singing along and just having a good time, I couldn't talk for about 3 days after. I was so hoarse. It was just really kind of a magical night. And it was funny because that week I saw Paul McCartney, And then I think 2 nights later I saw Erasure. And then a couple of nights after that I saw Aerosmith with Cinderella opening for them.
Huh.
Yeah, you can't really get as diverse a concert as those three.
Oh, please. I saw AC/DC at the Capitol Theater in New York. It's like a 3,000 seat theater. So imagine seeing AC/DC like that. I don't think I heard correctly for 4 or 5 days after that. So I've gone all the way from that. I've seen heavy metal shows all the way. I went to see the Three Tenors in Central Park, which was a phenomenal show. I even saw Garth Brooks in Central Park. I'm not a country music fan, but that was a good time. I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Those were the good old days. I can't afford that shit anymore. I really can't.
No. Tickets are so ridiculously priced. It's not even funny.
Lately, I have been going to see more local. I won't say local, but I've been going to see a lot of shows where it's, European bands or power metal bands from Europe or Scandinavia, because they're not quite as well known here. Like a band like Nightwish will sell out a 90,000 seat arena in Finland, but they come here and they play smaller venues like the Hammerstein Ballroom, and for like $46 or maybe it was $56, I saw Delane, Nightwish, and Sabaton. Like 3 pretty big power metal bands. Like 5 hours of music for $46. So lately I've been doing that because I feel like I get a lot more for my money.
Let's wrap this up with, you could recommend just one album that everybody should listen to. What would it be?
Wow. One album that everyone should listen to. I would be tempted to go with a Rush album, but I won't. I would say, like, if I had to pick one, where it was going to represent, like, the heart of rock and roll, I would say Exile on Main Street by the Rolling Stones. I'm not a huge Stones fan overall, but that is for me, one of the top 10 albums of all time. So you wanted to give someone a real flavor of rock and roll, and the Stones at the height of their power, Exile on Main Street.
It's so hard because there's so many. I think probably The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis.
Good choice.
Because I think really that probably is just the pinnacle of prog rock from the time. It's absolutely epic in scope. Some fantastic lyrics, some really, really good music, and Phil Collins kicking ass on the drums. People really pick on Phil Collins for a lot of his more recent music, or his ballads and stuff like that. If they go back and listen to the way he would drum, on the early Genesis albums, they'd be shocked.
Yeah, I always felt Phil Collins was a highly underrated drummer. I'm not a fan of him as a vocalist. I'm not going to lie about that. But yeah, I agree. Very highly underrated as a drummer.
Well, that's it for this week. And next week, fingers crossed, we're actually going to have another interview.
Yes, we are.
And
dun, dun, dun.
We're going to keep that a surprise.
Yeah.
So in case it falls through, we won't look any more stupid than what we will.
Yeah, we certainly don't need that.
And if you like Imaginarium, go ahead and check out the other podcasts that we have on the Supernauts website at thesupernauts.com, including Weekday Matinee that I do with Jerry Janda. If his movie Painkiller gets any more awards and he does any more work, he's not going to want to work with me anymore.
I know, but I hope he doesn't forget the little people.
Yeah, I'm going to be one of those people that he steps on his way up.
Probably.
And
I hope he's listening.
I may edit that out. And until next time, may all your journeys be filled with pure imagination.
Put another nickel in the Nickelodeon. All I want is loving you and music, music, music. I'd do anything for you, anything you'd want me to. All I want is